Welcome to Introduction to Lifespan Development, from neonate to late adulthood. So for this lecture, we're really just going to set the stage. We're going to talk kind of about the direction we're going. We're going to talk about some broad influences of normal human development and introduce you to some terms and concepts that we'll return to over and over again throughout this course. The objectives for this lecture are to describe the processes influencing typical human development, identify factors influencing human development, and define key terms related to human development. So, lifespan development is a complex process that is influenced by different factors. Some of the factors are biological in nature. We have physiological development, and this is probably the most observable. You see that a baby changes significantly from year 0 to year 1 to year 2. And these biological, physiological changes continue to occur throughout the lifespan. But that's not all. A human being undergoes significant psychological and cognitive changes as they go through their lifespan development. They become more complex. And behavioral and social changes occur as well. How one acts changes throughout the different stages of one's life. Beyond these biological factors, there's also environmental factors that influence lifespan development. We are all immersed in a social setting. Our social surroundings, our social support, our family, our friends all influence how we develop, as well as the cultural environment in which we develop. On top of both of these things, there's also what we call the physical and natural environment. The surroundings in which we develop can either promote or possibly hinder a healthy, normal lifespan development. So then what constitutes normal human development? Well, you can look at this different ways. One way to look at it is to look at it as a progression of normative milestones. We have typical biological development. We can assume that as people age, they should hit certain biological landmarks at certain times. For example, learning to crawl, learning to walk, etc. We can also track psychological and cognitive development. We realize that as a human being grows and develops, they're going to be able to do more and more complex psychological and cognitive activities and processes. And there's typically these milestones on which they occur. This is the same for social behavioral development, how we communicate, how we respond, how we can do things like take another person's perspective, all occur within a normative milestone period. Now, I will say that normative milestones, there are time frames, but these are fairly loose. And just because someone doesn't hit one at the exact time they're supposed to, doesn't mean that they never will. But normative milestone accomplishments gives us a litmus of whether or not somebody is developing normally. So, what are the means and ends of lifespan development? Well, the means are normative progression through the developmental milestones. That is how we develop normally, the how. We move from one stage to another, we become bigger, more complex, more mature. But what are the ends? Why does it matter? Why do we study lifespan development? What is the goal of normal development? Well, normal development provides capacity. It provides capacity for our ability to perform the activities that we wish to perform. It provides capacity for participation, so how we can participate in the activities we wish to participate in. So not only performance, but the ability to even engage in them. And then well-being. Our well-being is in part influenced by our ability to participate and perform in our occupations. So to be able to develop normally is part of the ability to be able to engage in these in a way that is meaningful to us. So these concepts lead us to a definition of health. And what is health? Now this matters because we are in a healthcare field, or going into a healthcare field anyway. Well, a definition of health put out by the World Health Organization is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So it brings up questions. Can you be healthy with a disease or infirmity? Well, look at the definition again. It's a state of complete physical, mental, or social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So the answer is maybe yes. Can you be unhealthy absent a disease or infirmity? Again, how we choose to define unhealthy, the answer could be yes again. So development across the lifespan will be considered as a stage or a step process in this course, though it is a continuous process. It's a biological arc of maturation and senescence. It's a process of adaptation, learning, and increasing sophistication and complexity. Some influences on human development. One is age-normative influences. These are chronological or biological milestones. For example, an age-normative influence is as I learned to walk at 1 year old. These are things that occur along these biological milestones that we had mentioned earlier. But these aren't the only things that can influence our development. We also have history-normative influences. These are generational influences that impact a cohort of individuals. So when we use the term cohort in lifespan development, what we mean is that a group of people that were born within the same time frame and then grew up, essentially went through lifespan development within a unique period of time. And the events that occur within the unique period of time influence the entire group. And we'll provide an example in the next slide. And finally, there are non-normative influences. These are unique influences impacting normal development processes. These are things that happen that are unique to each and every one of us. So let's think of some examples that might have occurred in somebody's life. An example of an age-normative milestone might be learning how to ride a bike. And now this is a partial example because typically people are able to ride a bike once they've achieved certain biological milestones within their life. You have to have a certain amount of strength and a certain amount of balance and coordination. Now, mind you, not everyone has the opportunity to ride a bike, so you could argue that it's also maybe a non-normative influence, but if we're looking just at the physical ability, then it could be considered an age-normative influence. A history-normative influence might be, for example, World War II. Now, this would have affected the cohort that was alive and developing between 1942 and 1945. But this was an event that, in one way or another, had an impact on everyone alive at that time. This would be a history-normative influence. And finally, an example of a non-normative influence might be an individual who, as a child, their family went through a divorce between the parents. This could have unique impacts on that person, not only just the divorce, but how it was handled and all of the unique events that occurred around it. So these are 3 examples of influences on human development. Other factors influencing human development, you can look at the term growth, which is a quantitative process, such as height, weight, and physical characteristics, easily measured. There's also maturation. This is a progression from simple to complex, biological, social, and emotional processes. Whereas growth is easy to measure, maturation is more complex, but we do both. So as you can see from this growth chart, growth is easily quantifiable. You see a chart for both length and weight as determined by age, and it gives you some norms there of what one could expect. But what might be measured regarding maturation? Can you measure the ability to problem solve or the ability to have social interactions? You can, but it's a little more complicated. Other factors influencing human development is learning, which is the acquisition of new knowledge and understanding through interaction with the environment. With learning comes the acquisition of skills, behavior acquired through learning. Other considerations when we think about what influences human development is the argument of nature versus nurture. When we say nature, we think about the genetics of it. We talk about how an individual develops as influenced by their genes and by biology. But is that the only thing that influences how we develop? And the answer is no. It's also the social environment, the nurture aspect. Genetic makeup does influence human development. Here, we get terms such as genotype and phenotype. Genotype is the inherited genetic instructions at the cellular and organism level, where phenotype are the observable characteristics and traits, how the gene expresses. For example, a phenotype might be blue eyes or dark hair. Our evolution of how we understand human development has changed over time. In the early days, they thought it was only the genes. Later, people thought it was either the genes or the environment. It was the nature or nurture. As time went on, there was a more mature understanding that as well as genes plus environment, it's both, as nature and nurture. There's interdependency between genes and environment, and is a bidirectional influence. And this is kind of our latest understanding, is that our genes influence a lot of ways we develop, but also our environment and some of the other things we're exposed to influence our actual genes. And this is epigenetics, which is a study on how environment changes our genotype. So it has been found that what we are exposed to in our environment actually has an impact on our genetic makeup. So it's a dynamic model. Human development is a complex interplay of genes, environment, family, and experience, all influencing one another. So concepts within dynamic models. One is health disparity, which is differences in the quality of health and healthcare across populations. This is an example of how epigenetics may be influenced. The access to quality healthcare. Social determinant of health is another term that comes from this world. A social determinant of health is an influencing or determining societal element that influences our health and subsequently our development. Access to nutrition, access to safe environments to exercise, access to early intervention. All of these things have influences. Coming together then is the health trajectory, and this is a predicted pattern of health or disablement that is likely given the internal and external influences on individuals as they develop and mature. Some things that we are exposed to make us more healthy, but some things make us less healthy, and these things are cumulative. So genetics are only a partial influence on a human's trajectory. Things such as preschool, nutrition, and reading to a child influence positively a person's health trajectory, yet poverty, toxic stress, and early chemical exposure have negative influences on a person's health trajectory. So when we think about key concepts within dynamics model, exposure impacting development plays a key role. Early programming has been proved to have a unique effect on a person's health trajectory, a uniquely positive effect. Individuals have what are called sensitive periods. A human being is more sensitive to change and to learning certain developmental skills within certain time periods. So if early programming can get to somebody within these sensitive periods, there's much more likelihood for advanced change and for positive change. And finally, as I mentioned before, it's a cumulative impact. All these negative events and positive events have a kind of stacking influence on one another, and hopefully the positive outweighs the negative. So in sum, human development is a complex process with multiple internal and external influences that can promote or hinder typical development. That includes risk factors and protective factors, things that can hinder normal lifespan development and things that can enhance normal lifespan development. Thank you for listening to this first lecture.